You stole what was rightfully mine. Now I'm taking back everything." The words hung in the air of the gleaming executive boardroom on the 35th floor of Reynolds Industries' downtown headquarters, where my sister Vanessa had called an emergency board meeting. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed accusingly in my direction, as 24 of Chicago's most influential business leaders stared at me with a mixture of shock and disdain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Megan Reynolds. 2 months ago, I was the rightful heir to Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, the company my grandfather had built from nothing, and my father had expanded into a billion-dollar enterprise. Now, I stood accused of corporate espionage against my own family's legacy. Little did Vanessa know that the elderly man sitting quietly in the corner, whom she had dismissed as just another board member, was Richard Greaves, the executor of our father's actual will, with documents that would expose who had really been manipulating the family fortune all along. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And if this story of betrayal and justice resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's video reveals the hidden truth about family business succession that could save your legacy. The morning had begun like any other at my modest apartment in Lincoln Park. I had been living there for the past 2 months, ever since the reading of my father's will had turned my world upside down. Though the space was comfortable, it was a far cry from the sprawling lakeside mansion where I had grown up, the family estate that now belonged exclusively to my older sister, Vanessa. At 34, I had spent the last decade working my way up through every department of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. Unlike Vanessa, who had pursued her own ventures in luxury cosmetics with her company Vanity RX, I had committed myself to learning our family business from the ground up, just as our father had asked of us. "One of you will lead this company someday," he had told us repeatedly throughout our childhood. "But only the one who truly understands what we've built." I had taken those words to heart, starting in the research labs after graduating from Northwestern with my biochemistry degree, then moving to production, quality assurance, and eventually marketing and distribution. For the past 3 years, I had served as Chief Innovation Officer, developing the company's breakthrough dermatological treatments that had doubled our market share and earned industry-wide recognition. Vanessa, meanwhile, had built Vanity RX into a respected niche brand, using her MBA from Wharton and natural talent for spotting market trends. While successful in her own right, she had always maintained a certain distance from the family business, something our father had noticed. "Your sister lives in a world of surfaces and appearances," he told me during one of our last conversations, before his unexpected heart attack. "You understand that what matters is what lies beneath." I had treasured those words, believing they signaled his intentions for the company's future. Which was why the reading of his will had been such a devastating shock. To my daughter Vanessa, I leave controlling interest in Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, with the expectation that she will guide the company into its next chapter with the same business acumen she has shown with her own ventures. The attorney's words had hit me like a physical blow. My sister, who had barely set foot in the company offices in years, had been handed the reins to everything I had worked for. My inheritance wasn't nothing. I received a generous trust fund and our family vacation home in Michigan, but the betrayal wasn't about money. It was about legacy, purpose, and the future I had been preparing for my entire professional life. Vanessa's expression as she received the news remained imprinted in my memory. A brief flash of surprise, quickly masked by a composed smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That momentary reaction had nagged at me in the weeks that followed, as I tried to reconcile my father's final decision with everything he had said and done throughout his life. I was stirring my morning coffee when my phone lit up with an incoming call from Marcus Chen, Reynolds' chief financial officer and my closest ally within the company. "Megan, you need to get down here right now," he said, his voice tense. "Vanessa's called an emergency board meeting. Something about financial irregularities she's discovered in the innovation department budgets. My stomach dropped. What? That's impossible. We've been completely transparent with all our resource allocations. I know that, but she's presenting evidence that suggests otherwise. She's talking about potential embezzlement, Megan. This looks like a deliberate attempt to discredit you. I set down my coffee cup with a shaking hand. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I rushed to dress, my mind raced through every financial decision I'd made in my department over the past 3 years. Every budget had been meticulously documented, every expenditure approved through proper channels. There was nothing to find because I had done nothing wrong, unless... A cold realization washed over me. 3 months before his death, my father and I had been working on a confidential project, a revolutionary delivery system for targeted cancer treatments that could transform both patient outcomes and the company's future. The research was preliminary but promising, with initial funding coming from a special reserve account that my father had personally controlled. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Had Vanessa discovered those transfers and misinterpreted them? Or worse, was she deliberately recasting them as something nefarious? I arrived at Reynolds Tower with 10 minutes to spare before the meeting. The security guard at the front desk, who had greeted me warmly every morning for years, now gave me an uncomfortable nod as he called upstairs for clearance to let me enter. "Ms. Reynolds will see you in the executive boardroom," he said, using my sister's name to refer to the position that had once been my father's. The elevator ride to the 35th floor gave me time to compose myself. Whatever Vanessa was planning, I needed to remain calm and rational. 24 members of Chicago's business elite sat on our board, and many had known me since childhood. They wouldn't easily believe that I would steal from my own family's company. When the elevator doors opened, I was immediately aware of hushed conversations stopping abruptly. Nancy Watkins, my father's longtime executive assistant, couldn't quite meet my eyes as she directed me to the boardroom. "They're waiting for you," she said quietly. I entered to find the board members already seated around the massive mahogany table, with Vanessa standing at its head, in our father's chair. At 41, my sister had the polished perfection of someone who had made appearance her business. Her chestnut hair was styled in a sleek bob, her navy suit impeccably tailored, her makeup flawless. The only thing we shared were our fathers' deep-set hazel eyes, though hers had always been more calculating than kind. "Ah, Megan, thank you for joining us." Her voice carried that precise mix of professional courtesy and underlying steel that she had perfected over years of business negotiations. "Please, take a seat." I noticed that my usual chair, the one I had occupied as a board member and innovation officer, had been removed. Instead, a solitary chair faced the board at the opposite end of the table, positioned like a witness stand or, more accurately, a defendant's seat. I chose to remain standing. "Vanessa, I understand you've called this meeting to discuss some financial concerns. I'm happy to address any questions about the innovation department's expenditures." My sister's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "This goes beyond simple concerns, I'm afraid." She tapped a sleek tablet in front of her, and the wall screen behind her illuminated with spreadsheets and transaction records. "Over the past 3 months, we've conducted a thorough audit of all departments following my assumption of leadership." She hadn't mentioned this audit to me despite our weekly executive meetings. "What we found in the innovation division was troubling, to say the least." Vanessa turned to the board. "A series of transfers totaling $3.7 million to accounts that appear to be shell companies with no clear research output or deliverables." Murmurs rippled through the room as board members examined the copies of financial documents that had been placed before them. "These transfers began approximately 6 months ago," Vanessa continued, "all authorized by the previous chief innovation officer. She didn't say my name, but her gaze fixed directly on me. I recognized the transactions. Immediately, they were the special project funding that my father had established, deliberately structured through separate entities to protect the intellectual property during the vulnerable early research phase. This was standard practice for potentially groundbreaking innovations in the pharmaceutical industry, where corporate espionage was a constant threat. Those transactions were fully authorized by Dad, by the previous CEO. I corrected myself, maintaining professionalism despite the personal nature of the attack. They represent funding for Project Phoenix, a confidential research initiative that he and I were developing. Vanessa's eyebrow arched. Interesting. Yet I find no record of this Project Phoenix in any of the company's official research documentation. No protocols, no lab assignments, no preliminary results. Because it was in early conceptual development, handled with the highest security protocols due to its potential value, I explained, feeling increasingly like I was walking into a trap. All documentation was kept in Dad's personal safe until we were ready to move to the formal research phase. Convenient, Vanessa said, letting the word hang in the air. And yet, when we opened Father's safe after his passing, no such documentation was found. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Either my father had moved the documents without telling me, or someone had removed them after his death. That's impossible, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I saw him place the preliminary research proposals there myself just weeks before he died. Arthur Rosenthal, the eldest board member and a contemporary of my grandfather's, leaned forward with concern etching his weathered face. Megan, these are serious discrepancies. If you authorized these transfers for legitimate research, surely there must be some evidence. Researchers who were consulted, preliminary lab work, something tangible. I nodded gratefully at the lifeline. Yes, absolutely. Dr. Ling in molecular biology did the initial feasibility studies, and Dr. Keller at Northwestern consulted on the theoretical framework. They can both confirm the project's existence. Vanessa's smile remained fixed. I've already spoken with both Dr. Ling and Dr. Keller. Neither recalls any formal project matching this description. My mind raced. Both scientists had signed NDAs specifically preventing them from acknowledging the project to anyone but my father or me. They were legally bound to deny knowledge of Phoenix if Vanessa had approached them directly. They signed confidentiality agreements, I explained. They can't acknowledge the work unless released from those agreements. Which would be on file with legal, correct? Vanessa countered smoothly. Yet legal has no record of such agreements. The trap was closing. Somehow, all documentation of Project Phoenix had vanished. The research proposals, the NDAs, the preliminary results. Everything that could corroborate my explanation was gone. I looked around the room, seeing doubt cloud the faces of people who had known me my entire life. Only Marcus appeared troubled by the proceedings rather than by my alleged actions, his brow furrowed as he studied the financial documents with obvious concern. Let's be clear about what we're discussing, Vanessa said, turning back to address the board directly. We have documented evidence of $3.7 million being transferred from company accounts to entities that appear to serve no legitimate business purpose, all authorized by the former Chief Innovation Officer. We have no documentation of the purported research project these funds supposedly supported. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. In addition, we've discovered that approximately 2 months before our father's passing, changes were made to his personal portfolio that would have significantly altered the distribution of his estate. Changes that would have granted the Innovation Division complete autonomy and placed it under the sole control of his younger daughter. This was entirely news to me. I had no knowledge of any such changes. These financial maneuvers, combined with the unexplained transfers, paint a troubling picture, Vanessa continued. It appears that while our father was alive, Certain influences were attempting to redirect both company assets and his personal estate in ways that would benefit certain parties at the expense of the company's overall health and stability. My hands gripped the back of the chair in front of me. The narrative she was constructing was both outrageous and devastatingly effective, portraying me as having manipulated our father and embezzled company funds. "That is absolutely false," I stated, my voice finally betraying my anger. "I would never take advantage of Dad or the company. Everything I've done has been for the benefit of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals." "And yet," Vanessa said, her voice rising to match mine, "the moment you didn't receive the inheritance you expected, mysterious projects with no documentation suddenly appear as explanations for missing millions?" She stepped around the table, moving closer to where I stood. "You stole what was rightfully mine. Now I'm taking back everything." The accusation silenced the room. "The board has seen the evidence. You used your position to manipulate our father and divert company funds. You've betrayed everything this family has built." The room felt suddenly airless as 24 pairs of eyes focused on me. I had spent my life building trust, demonstrating integrity, investing everything I had into the company's future. And in a single meeting, my sister had stripped it all away with a carefully constructed web of implications and missing evidence. "I've dedicated my career to this company," I said, looking each board member in the eye. "I would never steal from it or manipulate my father. There's an explanation for these transfers, and I will provide it." "I'm afraid you won't have that opportunity," Vanessa replied coolly. "The board has already been presented with the full audit results and has reached a decision." My gaze snapped to Marcus, whose expression confirmed what I suspected. This emergency meeting had been preceded by private sessions with board members, where Vanessa had laid the groundwork for today's accusations. "As CEO, I am officially terminating your employment with Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into financial misconduct," Vanessa announced. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." The finality of her words hit me like a physical blow. Not only had I lost my inheritance, but now my professional reputation, the one thing I valued even more, was being systematically destroyed. As security approached, I noticed an elderly man in the corner seat shifting uncomfortably. I recognized him vaguely as a recent addition to the board, having joined just after my father's death. Unlike the others, his expression held neither judgment nor pity, but something closer to quiet calculation. "Board members, if I might interrupt," he said, his voice surprisingly authoritative for his frail appearance. "I believe we may be acting prematurely." Vanessa's perfect composure faltered slightly. "Mr. Greaves, the evidence is quite clear, and the board has already indicated its support for this necessary action." "Has it?" the man asked mildly, glancing around the table. "I don't recall a formal vote being taken today." "We discussed this extensively in yesterday's closed session," Vanessa said, a hint of impatience creeping into her tone. "A session to which I was not invited, interestingly enough," he noted. "As executor of Harrison Reynolds' estate, I would have thought my perspective relevant." The words hung in the air, creating a sudden shift in the room's energy. I hadn't known that this man was the executor of my father's will, the official will that had left me with a trust fund but no company leadership. "Executor?" I asked, finding my voice. "I thought Blanchard and Associates handled the estate." Mr. Greaves smiled slightly. "They handled the initial reading of the provisional will, yes. But your father was a careful man who understood that appearances can be deceiving. I was appointed as the executor of his complete estate, with specific instructions that have only recently become relevant." For the first time, I saw genuine uncertainty flash across Vanessa's face. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Greaves?" she asked, her voice tight. "Simply that before we allow security to escort Ms. Reynolds from the building, perhaps we should review all the relevant information." He reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope, including this, which Harrison instructed me to open only in the event that certain actions were taken against his younger daughter. As Mr. Greaves broke the seal, I felt a strange mixture of hope and trepidation. Whatever that envelope contained, it represented my father's voice reaching beyond death, and perhaps the answers to questions that had haunted me since the reading of his will. I stood in stunned silence as Richard Greaves opened the sealed envelope with deliberate care, his weathered fingers working methodically as if he had all the time in the world. The boardroom's tension was palpable. Executive assistants who had been taking notes suddenly found their pens motionless. Board members leaned forward in their ergonomic chairs, and Vanessa's perfect composure showed the first hairline fractures I'd seen since childhood. "What I hold here," Richard said, his voice stronger than his frail appearance suggested, "is what Harrison Reynolds called his contingency protocol." He was quite specific about the circumstances under which I should produce these documents. Vanessa's artificial smile remained fixed, but her eyes had narrowed to calculating slits. "Mr. Greaves, while I appreciate your dedication to your role, this emergency board meeting was called to address specific financial irregularities that demand immediate action. Perhaps we could schedule a separate meeting to discuss whatever paperwork you've been holding." Her dismissive tone didn't faze Richard in the slightest. "The irregularities you've identified, Ms. Reynolds, are precisely why these documents must be reviewed now. Your father anticipated this very scenario." He removed several papers from the envelope and carefully placed his reading glasses on his nose. "Harrison Reynolds executed these documents 3 months before his death, notarized and witnessed by myself and 2 other independent parties." I felt my heart racing as Richard began to read. "In the event that accusations of financial impropriety are levied against my daughter Megan regarding Project Phoenix, this document serves as official confirmation that all transfers to accounts associated with Phoenix research initiatives were authorized by me personally as CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals." Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Richard continued, his voice steady and clear. "Project Phoenix represents a proprietary delivery system for targeted cancer treatments, developed in collaboration with Dr. Elizabeth Ling and Dr. James Keller under the strictest confidentiality protocols. All documentation related to Phoenix is maintained in a secure data room at Granite Trust Bank, accessible only with the enclosed key and authentication codes." Richard looked up, his gaze moving deliberately from Vanessa to me. "The second document here provides the exact account numbers, transfer amounts, and research milestones associated with Project Phoenix, matching precisely the irregular transactions identified in today's presentation." I exhaled slowly, feeling vindication wash over me like a physical wave. The project was real. The transfers were legitimate. My father had created a separate, secure repository for all the documentation that had mysteriously disappeared from his office safe. Arthur Rosenthal, who had seemed troubled by the accusations against me, spoke up. "Mr. Greaves, while this certainly adds context to the financial transfers, it doesn't explain why Ms. Megan Reynolds would have authorized them without proper documentation in our systems." Richard nodded, acknowledging the question. Harrison anticipated that concern as well. He returned to the documents. Project Phoenix was deliberately kept outside standard company protocols due to its revolutionary potential. Only 2 executives were authorized to direct these transfers: myself and my daughter Megan, whose expertise in biochemical delivery systems made her an essential partner in this research. Marcus, our CFO, who had been examining the financial documents with increasing skepticism throughout Vanessa's presentation, looked up. That would explain why the authorization codes on these transfers were valid, but didn't follow our standard departmental approval chains. They were using executive override protocols. The mood in the room was shifting perceptibly. Board members who had been ready to condemn me minutes earlier were now exchanging uncertain glances. reassessing the narrative that Vanessa had so carefully constructed. Vanessa, however, wasn't ready to concede. Even if these transfers were legitimate, which remains to be conclusively proven, they don't explain the attempted changes to our father's estate plan that would have given Megan control of the company. Richard Greaves smiled slightly, the expression making him look suddenly younger, more formidable. "I'm glad you raised that point, Ms. Reynolds." He withdrew another document from the envelope. "This brings us to the heart of why Harrison appointed me executor rather than relying solely on the family attorneys. What you've referred to as attempted changes to his estate were in fact his original intentions, documented here in his primary will, dated 18 months before his death. Even from where I stood, I could see my father's distinctive signature at the bottom of the page." Richard adjusted his glasses and began reading again. "Having observed both my daughters throughout their professional lives, I hereby bequeath controlling interest in Reynolds Pharmaceuticals to my daughter Megan, whose dedication to our company's mission and values has demonstrated her readiness to lead our family legacy into its next chapter." The words echoed in my mind, confirming what I had always believed about my father's intentions. But they also raised a devastating question. How had the will that was actually read given control to Vanessa instead? As if reading my thoughts, Richard continued. "Harrison amended this will approximately 6 weeks before his death, creating the distribution that was read to the family after his passing, the one that placed control with Ms. Vanessa Reynolds." Richard looked directly at Vanessa now, his kindly demeanor hardening almost imperceptibly. Harrison had concerns about this amendment immediately after executing it. He contacted me 3 days before his heart attack, indicating that he believed the changes might not have accurately reflected his wishes and requesting an urgent review of both the circumstances surrounding the amendment and the document itself. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. Our father was of sound mind when he decided to place me in charge. He recognized that the company needed strong business leadership, not just scientific expertise." "Perhaps," Richard acknowledged. "But Harrison also instructed me to investigate certain unusual activities in the event of his sudden death before our scheduled meeting. Among these was a forensic examination of his personal computer and email accounts." He removed a final document from the envelope. "This report from Sentinel Digital Forensics confirms that Harrison's personal email was accessed without authorization on multiple occasions in the weeks before the will amendment. These intrusions came from an IP address associated with the Vanity RX corporate offices." The boardroom fell silent as the implications settled over everyone present. Vanessa's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. "Further," Richard continued relentlessly, "the digital forensic team recovered deleted correspondence between Harrison and his personal physician, in which Harrison expressed confusion about medication side effects he was experiencing. Side effects that were inconsistent with his prescribed heart medication, but consistent with certain psychoactive drugs that could influence decision-making capacity." Marcus let out a low whistle. Arthur Rosenthal's face had hardened into granite. "Are you suggesting," Vanessa said, her voice dangerously quiet, "that I somehow drugged our father to manipulate his will?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Richard replied mildly. "I'm simply presenting the evidence Harrison asked me to gather. The board can draw its own conclusions." He turned to address the entire room. "What is clear is that Harrison Reynolds' original estate plan, created when he was demonstrably of sound mind and body, designated Megan Reynolds as his successor at Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. The amended will was created under circumstances suspicious enough that Harrison himself requested investigation." Richard carefully gathered the documents and returned them to his briefcase. "As executor, I am officially contesting the amended will on the grounds of undue influence and potential diminished capacity. The matter will be decided in probate court, but in the meantime, I believe the board has sufficient cause to suspend any punitive actions against Megan Reynolds. The atmosphere in the boardroom had transformed completely. Board members who had been ready to watch me, escorted from the building by security, were now looking at Vanessa with thinly veiled suspicion. The security guards who had approached to remove me now stood awkwardly near the door, awaiting new instructions. Vanessa's face had transformed into a mask of cold fury. "This is a desperate attempt to undermine a legitimate succession," she said, addressing the board. "My father chose me to lead this company, and these vague insinuations and convenient documents shouldn't distract us from the real issue: millions in company funds directed to projects with no oversight." Arthur Rosenthal, who had mentored both my father and grandfather, stood slowly from his seat at the table. At 78, he remained an imposing figure whose opinion carried enormous weight with the board. "I've served Reynolds Pharmaceuticals for over 50 years, he said, his voice gravelly with age but unwavering in authority. "I knew Martin Reynolds when he was mixing compounds in his garage, and I watched Harrison turn his father's vision into a billion-dollar enterprise. If Harrison Reynolds had concerns about his amended will, and if there's evidence of tampering with his decision-making capacity, this board has a fiduciary responsibility to investigate fully before taking irreversible actions." He turned to face Vanessa directly. "I move that we suspend this disciplinary proceeding pending a complete review of all evidence presented today, including verification of the Phoenix Project documentation at Granite Trust." Marcus immediately seconded the motion. Vanessa, recognizing the shifting tide, attempted to maintain control of the meeting. "As CEO, I have the authority to terminate employees for cause, regardless of board review." "Actually," Richard Greaves interjected, "the bylaws of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals specifically require board approval for termination of C-level executives, particularly those who are family members and shareholders." I could see Vanessa calculating, reassessing her position as her carefully constructed plan unraveled. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and adopted a tone of reasonable compromise. "In the interest of thoroughness, I'm willing to postpone any employment decisions regarding my sister until we've verified these documents," she conceded. "However, given the serious nature of the financial questions raised today, I believe it would be inappropriate for Megan to continue in her role as Chief Innovation Officer during this investigation." The suggestion seemed reasonable on its face, a compromise that acknowledged the new information while still pursuing the financial concerns. Several board members nodded in tentative agreement. Before anyone could respond, Richard spoke again. "There's one additional matter that should inform this discussion." He withdrew a final document from his briefcase. This letter was meant to be opened only if Harrison died before his planned board meeting next month. Given today's developments, I believe it's appropriate to share it now. He began to read. "To the Board of Directors of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't live to implement the reorganization I had planned to announce. After careful consideration of our company's future and the unique talents of both my daughters, I had decided to split the executive functions of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals." Richard paused, looking directly at Vanessa and me before continuing. "Vanessa's business acumen and market instincts would serve as CEO, focused on strategic partnerships and market expansion, while Megan's scientific expertise and innovation leadership would be elevated to President of Research and Development, with both divisions operating as equal pillars of the company's structure." I felt a surge of emotions, vindication that my father had valued my contributions, but also a bittersweet recognition that his actual plan had been more nuanced than either Vanessa or I had understood. He hadn't intended to choose between us, but to position each of us where our strengths could best serve the company. "This structure," Richard continued reading, "acknowledges the complementary skills my daughters bring to our family enterprise. While they have different approaches, both are Reynolds through and through, And together, they could take this company to heights I've only dreamed of. If they can set aside their rivalry and recognize that their differences are actually their greatest strength as a leadership team. The words hung in the air, my father's wisdom reaching across the divide of death to offer a vision neither Vanessa nor I had considered. It seems, Arthur Rosenthal said into the silence that followed, that Harrison envisioned a shared leadership model that would capitalize on both his daughter's considerable talents. He looked around the table. In light of this new information, I propose that we table all discussions of termination or suspension and instead move to an emergency session to consider how we might implement Harrison's vision for the company leadership. Marcus and several other board members voiced immediate agreement. Vanessa, who had built her entire strategy around discrediting me completely, now found herself outmaneuvered. If she opposed this reasonable approach that honored our father's wishes, she would appear petty and self-serving, especially with her credibility already damaged by the revelations about the amended will. She forced a tight smile. "I'm always open to honoring our father's vision," she said smoothly. "However, we can't ignore the serious questions about Project Phoenix that still need to be resolved." "Agreed," Arthur replied, "which is why I suggest a small delegation accompany Mr. Greaves and Megan to Granite Trust immediately to verify the Project Phoenix documentation, while the rest of us review the digital forensic report regarding the amended will. We can reconvene tomorrow, with all facts in hand." The board quickly approved this plan, and within minutes, I found myself leaving the boardroom with Richard Greaves, Marcus, Arthur, and 2 other senior board members. As we walked toward the elevators, I noticed Vanessa engaged in an intense, whispered conversation with Nancy, our father's former assistant who had aligned herself with my sister after his death. "Ms. Reynolds," Richard said quietly as we waited for the elevator, "there's something you should know." I turned to him, still processing everything that had transpired in the boardroom. "Yes?" "Your father suspected that someone close to him might attempt to access or destroy the Phoenix documentation. That's why he created the separate secure storage at Granite Trust." He paused, his eyes kind but serious. But he was also concerned about more direct interference. "What do you mean?" The heart attack that killed him came very suddenly, in a man whose cardiac health had been closely monitored for years. Harrison had requested that in the event of his unexpected death, certain toxicology tests should be performed discreetly. The elevator arrived, and we stepped inside with the others. Richard lowered his voice further. "Those results recently came back. They found traces of a compound that can trigger cardiac events but dissipates quickly from the bloodstream. It would have gone undetected in standard post-mortem testing." I felt my legs weaken beneath me, steadying myself against the elevator wall as the implications crashed over me. "Are you saying my father was—" The medical examiner was unwilling to definitively rule it a homicide without more evidence, Richard said carefully. But he confirmed it was not a natural cardiac event. Harrison suspected someone might try to stop him before he could revise his will back to its original state and implement the new company structure. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and we stepped out as a group. As we walked toward the building's exit, I caught sight of my reflection in the gleaming marble walls, pale, shaken, but somehow still standing. "Does Vanessa know about this?" I asked quietly. "Not yet," Richard replied. "The forensic financial investigation your father initiated is still ongoing. Harrison instructed me to wait until we had conclusive evidence before making any accusations." We emerged into the bright Chicago afternoon, the spring sunshine incongruously cheerful against the darkness of what I'd just learned. As we waited for the cars that would take us to Granite Trust, I turned to Richard. "Why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? Why wait until I was nearly escorted out of the building?" His expression was somber. "Your father's instructions were explicit. He wanted to see how events would unfold naturally, to give everyone involved the opportunity to reveal their true character through their actions. The truth will emerge in its own time," he told me. And when it does, it will be undeniable. I thought about the past 2 months, the shock of the will reading, Vanessa's immediate moves to sideline me at the company, the gradual discovery of missing documentation, and finally, today's attempt to destroy my reputation completely. Had my father truly anticipated all of this? He knew Vanessa would come after me, I realized aloud. Richard nodded. He hoped she wouldn't, but he prepared for the possibility. Harrison never gave up on either of his daughters. He believed you both had the capacity for greatness. But he wasn't blind to Vanessa's ambition. The company cars pulled up to the curb, sleek black sedans with the Reynolds Pharmaceuticals logo discreetly emblazoned on the doors. As our small group divided between the vehicles, Arthur Rosenthal gestured. For me to join him. I've known you since you were in pigtails, Megan, he said as we settled into the back seat. I never believed you would steal from the company. But I have to ask, why didn't you fight harder when the will was read? Why accept Vanessa's leadership? Without question? I looked out at the Chicago skyline as we pulled away from the curb, considering his question. It was what Dad wanted, or what I thought he wanted. I couldn't understand why he'd changed his mind, but I respected his decision. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. Integrity before ego. That's rare in our industry. He patted my hand. Harrison saw that in you. But he also knew that leading Reynolds would require more than just scientific brilliance and personal integrity. What do you mean? Sometimes, Megan, you have to fight for what's right, not just accept what seems to be the established order. The pharmaceutical industry isn't just about creating life-saving drugs. It's about navigating ruthless competition, both from outside and sometimes from within. His words echoed in my mind as our car wound through downtown Chicago toward the imposing limestone facade of Granite Trust Bank. For years, I had believed that simply doing good work, creating innovative treatments, following ethical protocols, respecting the scientific process, would be enough. I had naively assumed that truth and merit would naturally rise to the top. Today had shown me otherwise. If Richard Greaves hadn't intervened at precisely the right moment, my reputation would have been destroyed. My career at Reynolds over and Project Phoenix, with its potential to help countless cancer patients, might have been buried forever. The truth didn't emerge on its own. It needed champions willing to fight for it. As we pulled up to Granite Trust, I straightened my shoulders and prepared to face whatever lay ahead. The documentation at Granite Trust would either vindicate me completely or raise more questions. But either way, I was done passively accepting the narrative others created about me. Richard nodded. Harrison anticipated that too. He removed a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table to me. This is the contact information for a private security firm your father retained. They've been on standby since his death, waiting for my call to activate their services. The thoroughness of my father's preparations was both comforting and chilling. He had seen the danger clearly enough to create multiple safeguards, yet had still fallen victim to it. As the bank staff helped us create certified copies of all the Phoenix documentation, I found myself thinking about my sister. Vanessa had always been intensely competitive, focused on winning at any cost. But murder? It seemed inconceivable that the sister who had taught me to ride a bike and defended me from bullies in elementary school could have evolved into someone capable of patricide. Yet the evidence was mounting. The altered will, the missing documentation from our father's safe, the suspicious circumstances of his death, and now his own written suspicions about Vanessa's unusual interest in his medication. What happens now? I asked Richard as we finished securing the last of the copies. Now we present this evidence to the board, he replied. The complete Phoenix documentation proves your innocence regarding the financial transfers. The succession planning documents show your father's true intentions for company leadership. And this letter... He paused, weighing his words carefully. This letter raises questions that can no longer be ignored about the circumstances of Harrison's death. Arthur Rosenthal joined us, his expression resolute. I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. I believe we have sufficient cause to temporarily suspend Vanessa's authority as CEO pending a complete investigation. The weight of what we were about to do settled over me. This wasn't just about clearing my name or securing my position in the company. We were potentially about to accuse my sister of criminal acts that could send her to prison for life. Is there any other explanation? I asked quietly. Any possibility that someone else could have accessed Dad's email, tampered with his medication, influenced the will changes? Marcus shook his head. The digital forensics report ties the email access directly to Vanessa's personal devices. And according to Richard, your father's assistant Nancy confirmed that Vanessa insisted on personally delivering his heart medication during the weeks before his death, claiming the pharmacy had made errors in the previous deliveries. I remembered how close Nancy and Vanessa had become in recent months, the whispered conversations, the sudden alignment after years of professional distance. Nancy knew, I realized. She might even have helped. We'll need her testimony, Richard confirmed. The investigators have already approached her discreetly. She's frightened but willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity from prosecution as an accessory. As we prepared to leave Granite Trust with our evidence secured, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Megan Reynolds. A woman's voice, vaguely familiar, but distorted by what sounded like a poor connection. Yes, who's this? It's Elaine Winters from Vanity RX's research division. We haven't met, but I've worked with your sister for years. The connection crackled. Listen carefully. Vanessa just called an emergency meeting of her R&D team. She's ordering us to prepare documentation showing that Phoenix was actually developed at Vanity RX 2 years ago and was stolen by your father. My blood ran cold. That's completely false. I know, Elaine replied. That's why I'm calling. She's pressuring the entire team to backdate research notes and clinical observations. Several of us have refused, but others are afraid of losing their jobs. She's backdating everything to make it appear that you and your father committed intellectual property theft. This was a new level of desperation, manufacturing false evidence to not only discredit me, but to smear my father's reputation posthumously. Thank you for telling me, I said. Would you be willing to document what's happening? We have evidence of the real timeline, but your testimony about this fabrication attempt would be crucial. There was a pause. I've already started gathering documentation. Several of us have been uncomfortable with Vanessa's ethical shortcuts for years, but this crosses a line none of us can accept. I'll send what I have to your personal email within the hour. After ending the call, I shared Elaine's information with the others. Richard immediately contacted the lead investigator to alert him to this new development, while Marcus called our chief legal officer to advise him of the potential IP fraud being orchestrated at Vanity RX. Vanessa's getting desperate, Arthur observed. She must suspect that we've found the Phoenix documentation. This is a preemptive strike to muddy the waters with contradictory evidence. As we left Granite Trust and headed back toward Reynolds Tower, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The path ahead was clear now, however difficult it might be. We had the evidence to refute Vanessa's accusations, reveal her manipulation of our father's will, and raise serious questions about her involvement in his death. The Reynolds Tower lobby was bustling with late-afternoon activity when we arrived. As we crossed toward the executive elevators, I noticed an unusual number of unfamiliar faces, men and women in business attire who seemed slightly out of place among our regular staff. Security, Richard murmured, noticing my observation. Harrison's contingency plan included placing several undercover security professionals in the building if the situation escalated. They've been activated. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, each of us mentally preparing for what would likely be a confrontation with Vanessa. When the doors opened, we found Nancy waiting, her expression tense. She knows, Nancy said without preamble. Someone at Granite Trust called her. She's locked herself in Harrison's office and called her Vanity RX security team. They're on their way. Richard nodded to one of our security escorts, who immediately made a call, presumably to counter this new development. Has she accessed any sensitive systems? He asked Nancy. She's trying to get into the main research database, but IT implemented the security protocol you requested this morning. She's locked out of everything except basic email. This was another element of my father's contingency plan that Richard had activated, isolating key systems in the event that Vanessa's actions threatened company assets. Where's the board? Arthur asked. Most members are in the main conference room. They returned after visiting the secure storage facility where we keep backup documentation. Vanessa tried to access those files this morning, but security stopped her. As we approached the boardroom, I noticed Marcus lagging slightly behind, checking something on his phone. His expression darkened. We have another problem, he said, catching up. Vanessa's started liquidating company assets, trying to transfer funds from our main operating accounts to offshore entities. She can't do that without co-signatures, Arthur objected. She's using emergency protocols that were established after the 2008 financial crisis, Marcus explained. They allow the CEO to move assets quickly in case of market collapse. I've already contacted our banks to freeze everything, but she managed to transfer about $30 million before we caught it. This escalation moved Vanessa's actions from potential family betrayal and corporate manipulation into clear criminal territory. She was now attempting to loot the company on her way out. When we entered the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Board members were engaged in heated discussions, some advocating immediate police involvement, others concerned about potential damage to the company's reputation if this became public. We have confirmation of the Phoenix Project's legitimacy, Arthur announced, silencing the room. Complete documentation has been secured from Granite Trust Bank, where Harrison Reynolds established a secure repository for all relevant materials. He gestured to me. Megan Reynolds has been completely vindicated regarding the financial transfers that were characterized as irregularities. Furthermore, we have evidence suggesting that Harrison Reynolds' amended will may have been executed under concerning circumstances that call its validity into question. One of the board members, Janet Chen, raised her hand. We've also confirmed that someone accessed Harrison's private safe after his death, but before the official inventory was conducted. Security footage shows Vanessa entering his office at 2 a.m. the night he died, removing documents and leaving with them. This new piece of evidence completed the picture. Vanessa had taken the Phoenix documentation from our father's safe, believing she had eliminated all record of the project. She couldn't have known about the duplicate materials at Granite Trust. Where do we stand legally? Asked another board member. What actions can we take immediately? Our chief legal officer, who had joined the meeting, stood to address the group. Based on the evidence we've seen today, we have grounds for immediate suspension of Vanessa Reynolds as CEO. The attempted asset transfers alone justify emergency action to protect the company. He turned to me. However, the succession question is more complex. The probate court will need to rule on the validity of the amended will before we can formally reinstate the original succession plan. That process could take months. The company needs leadership. Now, Arthur said firmly. Harrison's letter clearly indicated his intention that Megan should lead research and development while Vanessa managed business operations. With Vanessa's position now untenable, I move that we appoint Megan as acting CEO until the court resolves the will dispute. The motion was seconded immediately by several board members. I was about to speak when the boardroom doors burst open. Vanessa stood in the doorway, flanked by two men who appeared to be private security. Her perfect composure was gone, replaced by barely contained fury. "This is a hostile takeover attempt," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. My sister has fabricated evidence to seize control of the company, and several board members are conspiring with her. Her gaze swept the room, landing on me with particular venom. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals is my birthright. I've spent my entire career preparing to lead this company, while Megan hid in research labs playing scientist instead of developing the business acumen required for executive leadership. The naked ambition in her voice silenced the room. Gone was any pretense of caring about our father's legacy or the company's mission. This was purely about power and control. "Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice level, "we have documented evidence that you accessed Dad's email without authorization, removed critical documents from his safe after his death, and are now attempting to transfer company assets to offshore accounts. Those aren't accusations. They're established facts. Circumstantial evidence that my sister has manipulated to serve her agenda," Vanessa countered. "I was protecting company assets from her incompetence." Arthur Rosenthal stood, his authority as the senior board member commanding immediate attention. "Vanessa, we have testimony from your father's assistant about your unusual insistence on handling his medication personally. We have forensic evidence suggesting his heart attack may not have been natural, and now we have confirmation that you're attempting to fabricate evidence at Vanity RX claiming that Phoenix was developed there, not at Reynolds." For a moment, Vanessa's mask slipped completely, shock registering at the mention of Vanity RX's involvement. She hadn't expected us to know about that final desperate maneuver. "This board is voting on your immediate suspension," Arthur continued. "You can leave voluntarily or security will escort you out. Either way, the authorities have been notified about the attempted asset transfers. They'll want to speak with you." The security personnel who had accompanied her to the boardroom stepped back slightly, clearly reassessing the situation. They were hired guns, not accomplices willing to face criminal charges. Vanessa looked around the room, calculating her remaining options and finding none. Finally, her gaze settled on me. "You think you've won?" she said, her voice cold. "But you don't have what it takes to lead this company. Dad knew it. That's why he changed his will. You're a researcher, not a leader. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals will fail under your direction." I met her gaze steadily. Dad believed in a balance of innovation and business acumen. He valued both our strengths. He wanted us to lead together, Vanessa. That was his true vision. Not choosing between us, but combining what each of us does best. Something flickered in her eyes. Regret, perhaps, or simply the recognition of a missed opportunity. For a moment, I glimpsed the sister I had once admired. Brilliant, determined, capable of remarkable achievements when she channeled her ambition constructively. "It's too late for that," she said finally. Then, with a last cold glance at the board, she turned and walked out, leaving her security detail behind. As the doors closed behind her, the board erupted in urgent discussions about next steps: securing company assets, preparing for potential media coverage, establishing interim leadership. Through it all, I remained still, processing the finality of what had just occurred. The sister I had grown up with was gone, replaced by someone whose ambition had consumed any familial loyalty or ethical boundary. Richard Greaves appeared at my side. "Harrison would be proud of how you've handled this," he said quietly. "It's never easy to stand against family, even when they've betrayed your trust." "I didn't want any of this," I admitted. "Not the conflict, not Vanessa's downfall, not even the CEO position." "Which is precisely why you'll excel in it," Richard replied. "The best leaders are often those who don't seek power for its own sake, but accept it as a responsibility to be wielded for a greater purpose." Arthur approached, extending his hand to me. "The vote was unanimous," he said. "The board has appointed you acting CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, effective immediately. A formal announcement will be prepared for release tomorrow morning." I accepted his handshake, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. And Vanessa? Security is monitoring her. The authorities have been notified about the asset transfers and will handle that aspect of the situation. As for the more serious concerns regarding your father's death, the investigation will continue, but more discreetly. Marcus joined us, his expression serious but supportive. Your first challenge as CEO will be addressing the staff. There are a lot of frightened and confused people out there who've just witnessed their leadership implode in real time. He was right. Beyond the boardroom walls, hundreds of Reynolds employees were trying to make sense of the rumors and tension that had permeated the building all day. They deserved clarity and reassurance. Schedule a company-wide meeting for tomorrow morning, I decided. I'll address everyone directly. No corporate speak, no vague assurances, just honest communication about what's happened and where we go from here. As the board meeting adjourned, I found myself standing alone in the room where, just hours earlier, I had faced what seemed like the end of my career at Reynolds. Now I was preparing to take the helm of the entire company. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa had stolen what should have been my inheritance and nearly destroyed my professional reputation in the process. Tomorrow, I would walk into her former office as the new CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. But unlike my sister, I didn't see this position as a birthright or a testament to personal ambition. Instead, I viewed it as my father had, a responsibility to uphold the company's mission of developing treatments that improved and saved lives. The path ahead would be challenging. There would be legal battles as Vanessa fought the will contest, public relations challenges as rumors of family betrayal inevitably leaked, and the ongoing pain of losing not only my father, but now effectively my sister as well. Yet as I gathered my things to leave the boardroom, I felt a surprising sense of clarity and purpose. My father had entrusted me with his legacy not because I was his daughter, but because he believed I would preserve what mattered most: the values and mission that had guided Reynolds Pharmaceuticals from its earliest days. Tomorrow would mark my first day as CEO. But more importantly, it would be another opportunity to prove that my father's faith in me had not been misplaced, that integrity, innovation, and a genuine commitment to helping patients could coexist with sound business leadership. As Richard had reminded me, the most effective leaders are often those who never sought power but accepted it as a solemn responsibility. I would lead not as Vanessa would have, focused on control and personal glory, but as my father had taught, me with purpose, principles, and an unwavering commitment to the greater good. The first rays of morning light filtered through the windows of my father's office, my office now, as I prepared for the company-wide address scheduled for 9 a.m. I had arrived at Reynolds Tower before dawn, needing time alone to gather my thoughts and connect with the space that had been the heart of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals for decades. The office remained largely as my father had left it. The massive mahogany desk that had belonged to my grandfather, the wall of awards and patents that chronicled our company's contributions to medicine, the collection of family photos that reminded everyone who entered that Reynolds was not just a corporation, but a legacy built on personal relationships and values. I picked up one particular photograph, my father and me in lab coats, both grinning widely as we held up a prototype of our first successful dermatological treatment. I had been fresh out of graduate school, eager to prove myself on merit rather than my name. He had insisted we document the moment, saying, "Remember this feeling, Megan. This is why we do what we do, not for profit margins or market share, but for the patients whose lives will be better because of what we've created together." A gentle knock interrupted my reminiscence. Nancy stood in the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of remorse and resolve. "The communications team has prepared a statement for your approval," she said, extending a folder. "And security reports that all systems have been secured. Vanessa's access credentials have been completely revoked." I accepted the folder, noting the formality in Nancy's manner, a stark contrast to the warm relationship we had shared before my father's death. "Thank you, Nancy. Please come in and close the door." She complied, though she remained standing near the entrance, her posture tense. The distance between us wasn't just physical. The revelation of her role in Vanessa's schemes had created a chasm of broken trust. "You've worked with this family for over 20 years," I said quietly. "You were my father's right hand, someone he trusted implicitly." Nancy's gaze dropped to the floor. "I made terrible choices, Megan. I've given the investigators my full statement about everything. Vanessa's access to your father's email, her involvement with his medication, the documents she removed from his safe. I'll testify to all of it." "What I don't understand is why," I said. "You and Dad were so close. He valued you not just as an assistant, but as a confidant and friend." Tears welled in her eyes. "Vanessa approached me 6 months ago. She had information about financial difficulties my son was facing, gambling, debts he'd hidden from the family. She offered to clear everything, to make sure he got the help he needed, if I would simply help her remain informed about your father's activities." The manipulation was classic Vanessa, finding leverage and applying it precisely where it would be most effective. "It started small," Nancy continued, forwarding certain emails, mentioning conversations about company strategy. "But after your father began work on Project Phoenix and started reconsidering his succession plans, her requests became more specific, more intrusive." "And you never considered coming to Dad, or to me?" I asked. "By then, I was already complicit," Nancy admitted. "And Vanessa made it clear that if I didn't continue, not only would my son face the consequences of his debts, but I would be implicated in corporate espionage. I was trapped in a situation of my own making. The pain of this additional betrayal was acute, yet I found myself feeling more pity than anger. Nancy had been manipulated through her most vulnerable point, her love for her child. How many of us could claim with certainty that we wouldn't compromise our principles if someone we loved was threatened? "I understand your investigators have offered me immunity in exchange for my testimony," Nancy said, finally meeting my gaze. "But I want you to know that I would tell the truth regardless. Your father deserves justice, and you deserve to lead the company he built, free from the shadow of how it came to you." I considered her words carefully. Trust, once broken, couldn't be instantly restored. Yet Reynolds Pharmaceuticals had always been guided by my father's belief in second chances, in the potential for redemption and growth even after serious missteps. "Thank you for your honesty," I said finally. "We'll need to establish new boundaries and expectations moving forward, but I believe people can learn from their mistakes and emerge stronger for having faced the consequences." Relief washed over Nancy's features, though she maintained her professional composure. "The board members are gathering in the main conference room, and the auditorium is prepared for your address to the staff." I nodded, returning my attention to the statement prepared by the communications team. It was expertly crafted corporate language, vague references to leadership transitions and continuity of vision, with no mention of the actual circumstances that had necessitated my sudden elevation to CEO. Setting it aside, I opened my laptop and began typing a different message, one that reflected the values of transparency and integrity that would guide my leadership. By the time I entered the boardroom 30 minutes later, I felt centered in a way I hadn't since before my father's death. The board members rose as I entered, a show of respect that acknowledged both my new position and the difficult path that had led to it. Before we proceed to the company address, I want to share my immediate priorities as acting CEO, I began, taking the seat at the head of the table that had been my father's for decades, and, briefly, Vanessa's. First, we will complete a comprehensive security review of all company systems, assets, and intellectual property to ensure nothing was compromised during recent events. Second, we will accelerate Project Phoenix into full development, with expanded research teams and increased funding. And third, we will establish a new corporate governance structure that emphasizes transparency, ethical decision-making, and a return to the patient-centered mission that has always been Reynolds's greatest strength. Arthur Rosenthal nodded, approvingly. Your father would be proud of these priorities, Megan. They strike the right balance between addressing immediate concerns and establishing your vision for the future. There's one additional matter, I continued. I've reviewed the succession plan my father envisioned. The dual leadership structure with research and business operations as equal pillars. While circumstances make the exact arrangement he proposed impossible, I believe the concept itself has merit. I turned to Marcus. Therefore, I'm appointing Marcus Chen as Chief Operating Officer, with expanded authority over all business functions. My background is in research and innovation. Marcus brings the financial and operational expertise we need. Together, we'll provide the balanced leadership my father envisioned. Marcus appeared momentarily surprised before nodding his acceptance. I'm honored by your trust, Megan, and I believe this structure will serve the company well during this transition. With the board's unanimous approval of these initial decisions, we moved as a group toward the auditorium where the employees of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals were gathering. I could feel the weight of expectations, from the board, from the staff, who had just lived through weeks of increasing tension and confusion, and from my own sense of responsibility to the legacy I now carried. As I stepped onto the stage and approached the podium, a hush fell over the assembled employees. They had been told only that there would be an important company announcement. Most were unaware of the dramatic events that had unfolded in the Kidai boardroom the previous day. Good morning, I began, deliberately setting aside the prepared statement. My name is Megan Reynolds. Many of you know me as the Chief Innovation Officer and the daughter of Harrison Reynolds. Today, I stand before you as the acting CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. Murmurs rippled through the auditorium as employees processed this unexpected news. I believe you deserve to know how this change occurred and what it means for our company moving forward. Some of what I'm about to share is difficult, both professionally and personally, but Reynolds has always been guided by a commitment to truth and integrity. That won't change under my leadership. Over the next 15 minutes, I provided a direct but measured account of recent events, the discovery of financial irregularities, the vindication of Project Phoenix, the board's decision to appoint me as acting CEO following concerns about attempted asset transfers. I didn't delve into the most painful aspects regarding my father's death or the full extent of Vanessa's actions, focusing instead on the governance issues that had necessitated the leadership change. This transition comes at a pivotal moment. For Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, I continued, we stand at the intersection of incredible scientific opportunity and significant industry challenges. How we navigate this moment will define our company for years to come. I moved away from the podium, preferring to speak directly to the employees without the barrier of a lectern between us. My father believed that pharmaceutical companies have a sacred responsibility to use science to improve and save lives. Profit is necessary for sustainability, but it should be the result of our mission, not the driver of it. Under my leadership, we will recommit to that patient-centered focus while embracing the innovation that has always been Reynolds's hallmark. The tension in the auditorium had begun to shift, uncertainty giving way to cautious optimism as I outlined specific initiatives, accelerating Project Phoenix, expanding our research into rare diseases, strengthening our ethical frameworks for clinical trials, and establishing new partnerships with patient advocacy groups. I know many of you have questions about what these changes mean for your departments, your projects, and your professional futures. In the coming days, Marcus Chen, our new Chief Operating Officer, and I will meet with every division to provide clarity and hear your concerns directly. As I concluded my address, I shared a final thought that had crystallized for me during the pre-dawn hours in my father's office. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals was built on the belief that business success and ethical leadership are not competing values but complementary ones. That when we make decisions based on what's right for patients, for science, and for public health, commercial success follows naturally. That integrity isn't just a nice ideal, but a practical business strategy. I paused, making eye contact with employees throughout the auditorium. My promise to each of you, and to the patients who depend on our work, is that Reynolds will move forward, not by forgetting our past, but by honoring the best of it, while courageously addressing our challenges. We have important work to do together, work that matters profoundly. I'm honored to lead that work, and I'm grateful to have all of you alongside me as we write the next chapter of the Reynolds legacy. The applause that followed wasn't the polite, obligatory kind that often accompanies corporate announcements. It was genuine, spontaneous, and surprisingly emotional. A release of the tension that had built throughout the organization during weeks of uncertainty and whispered concerns. As I stepped away from the microphone, Marcus joined me on stage, symbolizing the partnership that would guide the company forward. Together, we fielded questions from employees, honest, sometimes difficult questions about the company's stability, Vanessa's departure, and how the leadership transition would affect ongoing projects. When the formal session ended, many employees approached to offer personal words of support or to share their relief that the tension of recent weeks had been addressed openly. Among them was Dr. Amara Patel, our brilliant lead researcher on autoimmune treatments, who had worked closely with my father for years. "Your father always said you were the future of Reynolds," she told me quietly. "Not just because you're his daughter, but because you understand that what we do isn't just business. It's a calling. The company is in good hands." The morning's events had been emotionally draining, but affirming. As the auditorium emptied, I found a moment of quiet to absorb the magnitude of what had transpired, not just today, but throughout the tumultuous weeks since my father's death. Richard Greaves appeared at my side, offering a gentle smile. "Harrison would be proud," he said simply. "Not just of your ascension to CEO, but of how you've handled the journey to get here, with grace, integrity, and remarkable resilience." "There's still so much to address," I acknowledged. "The legal issues with Vanessa, the ongoing investigation into Dad's death, re-establishing trust with partners and investors who may have heard rumors about our internal conflicts." "True," Richard agreed. "But you've laid the right foundation. Today. Transparency about what can be shared, discretion about the most painful details, and above all, a clear vision that gives people something positive to rally around rather than just a crisis to weather." As we left the auditorium together, he added, "Harrison once told me that crisis doesn't build character as much as it reveals it. These past weeks have revealed yours, Megan. And that revelation gives everyone, the board, your employees, and me, great confidence in Reynolds' future under your leadership." The remainder of that first day as CEO unfolded in a whirlwind of meetings, briefings, and strategic discussions. By late afternoon, I found myself back in my father's office, my office, reviewing the initial legal filings against Vanessa for the attempted asset transfers. A soft knock drew my attention to the doorway, where Marcus stood with an update on the financial safeguards being implemented and news that the first $18 million of the transferred funds had already been recovered. "The banks have been extremely cooperative once they understood the situation," he explained. "We should recover most, if not all, of the transferred assets within days." "That's excellent news," I replied. "What about the Phoenix research? Have you confirmed all materials are secure?" Marcus nodded. "The research database has been isolated on a separate secure server, accessible only to authorized team members. Dr. Ling is already assembling an expanded research team, pending your approval of the budget." "Tell her she has it," I said without hesitation. "Phoenix is our top priority. I want to accelerate the timeline for clinical trials, assuming the preliminary results continue to be promising. As Marcus made notes on his tablet, I noticed him hesitate slightly. "There's one more thing," he said. "The authorities have formally charged Vanessa with attempted wire fraud and embezzlement based on the asset transfers. They're executing search warrants at her home and at Vanity RX headquarters right now." The news hit me with unexpected force. Despite everything Vanessa had done, some part of me still struggled to reconcile the sister I had grown up with, competitive but caring, in her own way, with the person who had orchestrated such elaborate deception and betrayal. "What about the other investigation?" I asked, not wanting to directly reference the questions surrounding our father's death. "Proceeding discreetly," Marcus assured me. "Richard is coordinating with the investigators. They're being extremely careful to build an airtight case before making any formal accusations beyond the financial crimes." I nodded, grateful for the care being taken. The prospect of my sister potentially facing murder charges was almost unbearable, regardless of the evidence suggesting her involvement. "There's something else we need to discuss," I said, changing the subject. "The acquisition offer from Reynolds Pharmaceuticals. Dad was strongly opposed to it, but the board seemed intrigued by the premium they were offering. We need to formulate our official response now that leadership has changed." Marcus took the seat across from my desk, his expression thoughtful. "Meridian's offer represents a 40% premium over our current market cap. From a purely financial perspective, it's extremely attractive. But their track record after acquisitions concerns me. Aggressive cost-cutting, especially in research divisions, and significant staff reductions." "That's precisely why Dad opposed it," I agreed. "Meridian's business model is fundamentally at odds with Reynolds' approach. They acquire promising research, fast-track it through minimal development, and maximize short-term profits with little concern for long-term patient outcomes or scientific advancement." The discussion evolved into a broader strategic conversation about Reynolds' future as an independent company. By the time Marcus left to prepare materials for the next day's executive committee meeting, we had outlined a comprehensive response to Meridian that politely but firmly declined their offer, while articulating a vision for Reynolds Independent growth that would reassure shareholders about the value of our current path. As evening approached, I found myself alone in the office, the weight of the day's events finally settling over me. I swiveled my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, now glowing with the golden light of sunset. 3 weeks ago, I had walked out of this building devastated by what seemed like the end of my professional journey at Reynolds. I had lost my father, been denied the leadership role I had spent my career preparing for, and faced the painful reality that my sister had somehow outmaneuvered me for control of our family legacy. Today, I sat in the CEO's chair, vindicated, but sobered by the painful truth of how this position had come to me. Not through the orderly succession my father had planned, but through the exposure of betrayal and potential crimes I still struggled to fully comprehend. Yet despite the painful journey, I felt a growing certainty about the path ahead. Reynolds Pharmaceuticals would not just survive this period of turmoil, but emerge stronger, more focused on its core mission, more committed to the ethical leadership that had been my father's true legacy. A soft chime from my computer signaled an incoming email, a preliminary report from the expanded Phoenix research team, already showing promising results from the latest round of testing. The delivery system was demonstrating unprecedented precision in targeting cancer cells while sparing healthy tissue, potentially revolutionizing treatment protocols for multiple aggressive cancers. This was what mattered, the potential to transform patients' lives, to reduce suffering, to offer hope where little had existed before. This was the true inheritance my father had left me, not just a corporate title or financial assets, but a vision of what business could be when guided by purpose, beyond profit. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard Greaves. "Dinner tonight? There's something your father wanted you to have." I responded affirmatively, curious about this new development. An hour later, I met Richard at Avellino's, a quiet Italian restaurant that had been my father's favorite for business dinners, private enough for confidential conversations, but with food good enough to make those conversations more pleasant. After we had ordered, Richard removed a small box from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between us. "Harrison asked me to give you this once you had assumed leadership of Reynolds, under whatever circumstances that might occur." The box was old, the velvet covering worn with age. Inside was a pocket watch that I recognized immediately, my grandfather's timepiece that had been passed to my father when he took over the company. He had this inscription added, Richard said, indicating the inside of the watch cover. I opened it to find my father's distinctive handwriting etched into the gold. "Time reveals truth. Truth builds legacy. Legacy lives in values, not titles." "He had absolute faith in you, Megan," Richard said quietly. "Not because you were his daughter, but because he recognized in you the qualities that create true leadership: integrity, purpose, resilience, and the wisdom to value people over power." As I held the watch, I felt a powerful connection to the generations of Reynolds leadership that had come before me. My grandfather, who had started with a single breakthrough medication mixed in his garage. My father, who had transformed that initial success into a company respected globally for both its innovations and its ethics. Leading Reynolds isn't just about scientific breakthroughs or business strategies, I reflected. It's about holding true to the values that have always defined us, even when facing challenges we never anticipated. Richard nodded. That's exactly what Harrison believed, and why, despite everything that's happened, he would be at peace, knowing you're at the helm now. As we finished our dinner, conversation turned to the future, the expansion of Project Phoenix, potential new research directions, ways to strengthen the company's ethical frameworks. Despite the difficult circumstances that had brought me to this position, I found myself genuinely excited about the possibilities ahead. Walking back to my car afterward, the weight of the pocket watch in my hand served as a tangible reminder of the legacy I now carried, not as a burden, but as a privilege and responsibility. The path to this moment had been painful and unexpected, but I was finally where I was meant to be. 3 weeks ago, my sister had stolen what I believed was rightfully mine, attempting to erase my contributions and destroy my professional reputation in the process. Today, I had walked into her former office as the new CEO of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, not through schemes or manipulation, but through the vindication that comes when truth finally emerges. My father had been right. Time does reveal truth. And, while the truth in our case had been more painful than anyone could have anticipated, it had also cleared the path for a new chapter of Reynolds Pharmaceuticals, one guided by the values that had always been our greatest strength. As I drove home through the Chicago night, I made a silent promise to my father and to myself. The circumstances of my rise to CEO would not define my leadership. Instead, I would be defined by the impact Reynolds made under my guidance, the lives improved by our innovations, the integrity of our business practices, and the culture of purpose and compassion that would draw the next generation of brilliant minds to our mission. The company's future, like the pocket watch now safely in my possession, was a precious inheritance, not just to be preserved, but to be enhanced through careful stewardship and bold vision, then passed on to those who would continue the legacy of putting patience before profits and purpose before power. The journey ahead would have challenges, no doubt. But for the first time since my father's death, I faced the future not with uncertainty or grief, but with clarity, conviction, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.